I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Well, delighted to have back with us today Scott Jorgensen. He is a legislative assistant and an author and reporter, and trying to give us an idea of how long they're going to be trapped in the building up there before they get out and what's happening. Hey, Scott, you're still there. What's wrong with this picture?
Well, I hope that your viewers and listeners get to enjoy their 4th of July weekend.
Wow. Any idea when you guys are going to sine die?
It'd probably be Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. The Senate got an email the other day saying be prepared to work through Saturday and Sunday. So we're racing to the exits right now.
Wow. Well, a lot of things happening. Kind of give us a recap. A lot around the July 1st of recreational marijuana, and then whether or not this is going to tie into medical marijuana. Give us a rundown of those bills that deal with that.
Yeah, there's been about a half a dozen of these bills, and one has been signed into law already, literally at the last moment before the legalization took effect, and that's House Bill 3400. And this was kind of the big catch-all bill for a lot of it, but it establishes licensure qualifications for producers, processors, retailers, and wholesalers, and establishes for the first time a tracking system. And that's one of the issues that we've had with the medical program, is that it's been so loosely regulated that nobody actually knows where the product is going until they keep finding out about it, turning up in other states all over the place, being sold on the black market. So this is at least an attempt to kind of wrap our arms around that issue. So that was the big one, and that one does a lot. It kind of establishes some of the land use parameters for doing large-scale grows, and it has the labeling, packaging, testing, and all those aspects of it as well.
What about the bill that would allow medical marijuana dispensaries to sell recreational marijuana?
So that's Senate Bill 460, and that's moved through the process. It had passed the Senate, and it's probably passed the House by now. If it hasn't already, it's well on its way. But that would start as of October 1st. It would give them the ability to sell. And there are limits, because the dispensaries will only be able to sell 1/4 of an ounce to a person every day. So it's not quite a free-for-all as it's been. Wow. But I'm already hearing some grumbling. There was another bill that establishes kind of the sales tax component of it, and that's House Bill 2041, and that passed both chambers overwhelmingly on bipartisan votes. And I'm hearing some grumblings from the Republican base, a lot of our activists throughout the state, who are saying this is going to open the door for a sales tax. You're already putting the structure in place as it pertains to this, and that's the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak. So that's a 17% tax, and the retailers are going to have to keep records for the first time ever and deal with the Department of Revenue.
Wow.
In ways that they haven't had to so far.
Wow. So that's a whole nother regulatory, bureaucratic management task.
You know, I made the prediction a couple of years ago while all this started happening that by the time this was done, that all these pot growing fellows all over the state are going to turn into raging Republicans once they've dealt with enough state agencies. And I stand by that prediction too.
Wow.
But one of the things this bill does is there's been this whole issue, and this was one of the sticking points early on with the Measure 91 committee, is this issue of local preemption and local governments being able to say, hey, we don't want that there. What this bill does is say, well, fine, cities and counties, you can do that, but if you do that, then you don't get to tax it, and you don't get any of the proceeds from it being taxed elsewhere. So that was one of the things that was in that bill. And then there's still a lot of issues on the federal side. I mean, at the end of the day, the federal government still considers this an illegal substance. And so that's complicating issues as it pertains to banking, because the banks are all insured by the FDIC, and they won't go near this with a 50-foot pole. And so you've got large amounts of cash that are going to be around that nobody can put in a bank until the federal issue is resolved. So there was another piece of legislation, that Senate Joint Memorial 12, and what this does is it urges Congress to develop a solution to the financial issues arising from the industry and to declassify marijuana as a Schedule I drug under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, because doing that would allow for more in-depth research on the risks and benefits associated with its use. So that one had passed the Senate and is also still moving through the process.
All right, so it's possible you could get picked up by a federal agent and arrested for having it, but if you get picked up by a state police or a city or county police, sheriff, you won't get fined for having it.
And that's one of those things that really needs to be addressed and resolved. And as you see more and more states moving towards legalization, I think it's going to force the hand of the federal government. I think the more states that do it before the Feds act, it will take away their leverage, I think, to do it effectively. And now they're going to end up doing it more on the state's terms than on their own. But I suppose that's the price of inaction. So there's another bill, and this one just passed the Senate a couple of days ago, and that's Senate Bill 844. And what this does is it establishes a task force. Believe it or not, we have a lot of bills like this session where we say, okay, here's a problem, let's study it. And what this does is that task force is going to be on researching the medical and public health properties of cannabis. And it's a 15-member task force, and what it also does is allow for an organization that provides hospice, palliative, or home health care services and residential facilities as well to be designated as an additional caregiver for a card holder. So that's another one of the bills that's been moving.
Wow. Do we have any idea, Scott, how what the guidelines are for enforcing this? In other words, how much is too much? What is being under the influence? Do we know?
That's one of the issues that is still unresolved, and there's a few of those, a few unresolved issues. One has to do with the use of water and electricity, and there were any number of issues that they set out to address at the beginning of the session, and they got most of them, and I think they really did a good job. The attorney at Legislative Council who did most of the work on this, there's times in the session where the guy was pulling the hair out of his head. And I had to talk him down off the ledge a couple of times, but he was pretty happy with what they were able to put together. So that was one of the provisions of House Bill 3400, which has been signed into law, is that this is another task force, and this is a task force on cannabis environmental best practices. But there won't actually be any legislation originating from that. They're tasked with producing a report to give to the interim legislative committees in September 2016. So any product that came out of that task force wouldn't actually be considered for legislation until the next regular session in 2017.
A couple of quick questions before we run out of time. First of all, education budget, is it done?
The education budget was done a while ago, and we haven't heard anything about these different proposals to redirect the kicker to fund education. But at this point in the session, anything can happen. And we're at a point in a situation where it's hurry up and wait and be prepared to drop everything at a moment's notice. Because they're just...
What's the deal with ODOT?
Well, the ODOT budget is among those that are moving, and the thing is that ODOT is facing serious financial trouble because they've been relying a lot on borrowing for most of the last decade to do projects, but the revenue just isn't keeping up with it. The transportation package that was being negotiated, that the governor's office blew up basically, and a bunch of the House Democrats would have given them a lifeline, and long-term would have put that agency on better, more sound financial footing. And the good news is that the package is still there, it's in place, but it probably wouldn't be considered until the 2017 session. But they're not starting from scratch. And the thing is that the transportation package was scuttled fairly early on through the passage of low-carbon fuel standards. And Kitzhaber, I don't think, was interested in resurrecting it. But when Governor Brown took over, she had been pressured, I think, by some of the blue-collar union groups that were kind of counting on this thing for work. And they started pressuring her, and they put the group together. I think maybe if they'd had more time, they would have come up with something, but they were really close. They had something workable, just the political reality wasn't there. But long term, yeah, ODOT does definitely need to put back on more firm financial footing. They're not there yet.
Okay.
And the transportation package would, the way it was, would have brought them back to solvency.
All right.
And maybe it still will if it gets considered.
Okay. Well, Scott, we're out of time, but thank you. Let's connect on the other side of the session when you finally get out of there, and just kind of give your overall assessment of what happened. And hopefully you will get out early next week, buddy.
Well, I plan on working all of next week no matter what happens. So maybe the week after as well, because we still have some cleanup to do and getting everything back in order. But then I plan on taking a week off and writing my next book. Okay,
good. All right, look forward to talking to you about the book, but we'll do a recap in a week or so. Nice to see you, Scott. All right, Scott Jorgensen from the legislature. We'll take a quick break. Up next, Dr. James Dobson.